Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, I'm continuing with the planting today. So we're restocking the garden as we're clearing crops and making space. I've got lettuce, endive, chicory, I've got some beetroot and brassicas that are more or less ready to go in. They're not all going in today, but hopefully I'll get some of them planted. So at the moment it's a case of using whatever space is available, and one space that is more or less free now is in a cold frame here. I think I'm going to put some chicory in there. I've got some Treviso chicory and that's going to be really great later in the year. There's absolutely no reason for that to be put in a cold frame. Doesn't need to be. This is probably better in the open ground. It's just that the cold frame has some space, so I thought I'd clear that out and get it ready. So earlier in the year this frame was filled with beetroot and spring onions. Well, I thought we'd eaten all the beetroot, but there's one lonely specimen left behind. Maybe it was too small at the time. Nice little beetroot now, I'll keep that. And some of our spring onions, well, they're not spring onions anymore. We had so many and they were sown in really thick clumps, so you don't get a lot off of them, but they've actually bulbed up now and the top growth is all limp. But these are nice little bulbs actually. This is white Lisbon. These bulbs, they don't keep very long. It's not a long keeping onion, but they'll be perfectly good for some weeks for sure. And it's a mild sweet onion, so perfectly good in the salad. I've also got some long red Florence in here. Now, these can form a really large bulb, but of course in the frame here they've been planted really close together just for young onions. So the bulbs are pretty small, but there's nothing wrong with those. Those are going to be delicious. Well, I've also got a fair bit of weed in here. All of that needs clearing out. And the soil in this particular frame is pretty grim, so I think I'll get a bag of horse compost in here before I do any more planting. I'm just sorting through these because there are one or two specimens in each clump that really aren't worth bothering with. These would also make very nice pickled onions, and well, I may well do that. Now, I obviously planted far too many spring onions this year, but at least these are a reasonable bulbing type, and I'm going to get this bonus crop instead. Right, I think that is all of the reasonable sized ones. Now all this needs is a good weeding. Ah, well, that was impressive. I hadn't noticed that I'd already split that bag at the other end. You silly boy. Now, I don't want to dig this, but I do want to just fork this compost in just into the top couple of inches. Usually I leave it just on the surface, but I think not this time. Now just a quick rake, and I think this will be good to go. So these are Treviso chicory. They're quite young plants still, and I suppose they could stay in these pots for another week or two. Let's have a little look. Well, yeah, I mean, there's not a huge amount of root around the sides, but there's plenty down the bottom, and the chicories, of course, are deep rooted, so I don't want to keep them in these pots any longer than I have to. I just need to figure out now just how many of these I can fit in here. So I think probably just, let's see, just 3 across maybe. Yeah, I think 3 across and probably 4 or 5 down. That will be okay. Now the soil in here is quite dry because this frame wasn't in use. It hasn't been watered for a little while. I'm surprised it's not drier actually, but I want to plant these at a reasonable depth. That's a bit too deep. And then firm them in nicely. Yeah, 4 rows will fit in fine here. I think that's all I can do. There's just a hint of the red colour on some of these leaves, but that proper red colour won't come until it's much cooler. So as I said, these really don't need to be in this frame. It's just that the frame is free and I might as well use it. Next year at some point it will have strawberries in, so this one won't be available to me in the future, but it's here now. So that's 16 of the Treviso chicory planted. I've still got half a dozen spare. I'm going to give this frame a really good watering now. No, I'm not. There's no water. Oh, plenty of malfunctions today. That's better. What? This bed here had onions and shallots. We've given it a good weeding. I've raked it over, added just a little bit of fish blood and bone. Now I've got these beetroot plants here. These are multi-sown. There's about 5 or 6 per cell, and I'm going to get these in here. I don't know how far I'm going to go with them. The rest of this bed I want for the rhubarb chard that I sowed recently. So I think I should be able to get 4 of these across the bed here. Yeah, that'll be okay. Now I want to set these reasonably deep. They're nice plants, plenty of root. Lovely. Now these cells are lovely. There's plenty of root there. It's not pot bound yet, but it's a good time to get them in the ground, I think. They are a little bit big perhaps for those cells. The hori is a better tool for this than the trowel because it's a sensible width for these cells. Now we might get a drop of rain later, but just in case we don't, I will give these a little bit of water now. The soil's pretty dry here at the moment. They're looking a bit bedraggled there, but after a few days these are going to perk up, I'm sure, and they'll be happy. There were some spares. I've potted them up for now, and I'll just keep them for a few weeks until I'm sure that these have established okay. So I've just been laying out some lettuce plants here. This half of the bed used to contain our alderman peas, and they went over a few weeks ago, so we finally got around to clearing them. In the other half I've got some borlotti beans, and they need to keep going for some time yet, but this is now free and I'm going to get these lettuce plants in. Well, at this point I had some kind of technical glitch with the microphone, so the sound has gone for a little bit. I'm sure I was mentioning that these are all loose leaf lettuce. Well, actually a couple of these can form heads, but they're quite loose heads, and I will be picking these leaf by leaf. Well, I think a newly planted bed of lettuce is a most attractive thing, and hopefully at this time of year, feels like the season is turning a little bit. These won't be quite so quick to bolt, but they certainly do need a drop of water. Well, my final job today is to finish off the planting in this bed. Now, this had our shallots in it earlier in the year, and one of the first things I started to replant with was this loaf chicory that you see at the end. So now I've got 3 further sorts of endive and chicory. This is, well, it's a frisee type. These make quite large plants, and they're quite flat, so I think I can only get sensibly 3 of those across the bed. Then I've got a broadleaf endive, and again that could be a fairly large plant, so I'm only going to put 3. And at the end I've got another chicory. That is a sugarloaf chicory. That tends to have a slightly more vertical growth habit, so I'm going to try and get 4 of those across the bed. And that one's interesting because, as the name suggests, it's a little bit sweeter than many of the other chicories. So if you're not keen on that bitter taste, that might be one worth trying. I actually quite like the bitter taste of the endive and chicory. This fellow though, this is Fin de Louviers, I'm not that keen on, if I'm honest. So far I've found this one to be extremely bitter, but if I get some decent plants from it before they run to seed, then I want to make sure they get properly blanched. So I will cover them, or I might even move them, lift them up, pot them and put them inside, just to exclude the light for a couple of weeks and help those leaves to blanch. You can tie them up, that's another option, but when they're blanched and those leaves have turned yellow, they're a lot less bitter. But so far I haven't really enjoyed that one this year. But this is actually the sort of thing to be planting, I think, at this time of year, the endive and the chicory. And then later this month I'm going to sow some of the mustards, and those are ideal for restocking the garden for the autumn and the winter. So well, they are certainly filling these pots. There we go. Yeah, there's lots of root here already. Endive and chicory do put on quite impressive root systems. So it's just as well I'm getting these in the ground today. Now this broadleafed endive looks actually rather similar to this chicory, but you can tell the difference. There's a lot more of the jagged edge to the leaf of the endive. Oh, these really don't want to come out. I think I must have overfilled these pots slightly, and if you pack the compost in a little bit too much, then they really don't want to come out afterwards. Yeah. And finally, the sugar loaf chicory. Got to be a bit more careful with the spacing here. Yeah. Oh, nice little plant. So that bed just needs a drop of water now. I will keep an eye on these over the next week or two. I've got some spare plants in case any of these fail to get established. Normally these things get established quite quickly, but you never know. If something goes wrong, I can always swap those plants out. Well, it's really nice to see the garden filling back up again after we've taken so many crops out. This process is going to continue, of course, and at some point we will be pulling stuff out of the polytunnels and the greenhouses, and hopefully I'll have some plants to fill those back up for the winter too. But that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.